Everything begins with an assumption. Before you speak, before you act, before you even try, there's already a quiet belief running in the background. Most people never question it. They assume things won't work out. They assume they'll fail. They assume the timing is wrong, the odds are against them, and someone else is more qualified. And then they call the result a reality, even though reality simply followed their lead. When you assume things will work out, something subtle but powerful shifts. Your posture changes, your tone changes, your tone changes. Your decisions change. You stop asking for permission and start taking responsibility. You stop waiting to be chosen and start showing up as if you already are. The assumption doesn't magically remove obstacles, but it changes how you move through them. People often think confidence comes from proofs, that once you win, succeed, or receive validation, confidence will arrive. But confidence is not a reward. It's a starting point. Acting as if everything works out doesn't mean you're naive or disconnected from risk. It means you believe your ability to respond is stronger than any outcome you can't control. When someone expects failure, they hesitate. They overthink. They delay decisions. They look for escape routes before they even begin. But when someone assumes things will work out, they commit fully. They speak clearly. They move faster. They recover quicker. Not because they're reckless, but because they trust themselves enough to adapt. This assumption becomes a filter. It filters how you interpret setbacks. A closed door stops being rejection and starts being redirection. A delay stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like preparation. The same event happens to two people, but the assumption decides the meaning they give it, and meaning decides momentum. Leaders, innovators, and changemakers don't wait for certainty. Certainty never arrives first. No. They move with belief before evidence. They act as if their effort matters, their voice counts, and their actions will compound over time. That assumption fuels consistency, and consistency is what eventually looks like luck from the outside. When you assume things will work out, you stop negotiating with fear. Fear doesn't disappear, but it loses authority. It no longer decides your pace or your direction. You still feel doubt, but doubt doesn't get the final vote. Your actions stop being reactive and start being intentional. This mindset also changes how others respond to you. People trust clarity. They follow conviction. When you act as if things will work out, others feel it. They sense alignment. They sense calm under pressure. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're not panicking without them. The power of assumption is not about controlling outcomes. It's about controlling identity. You become the kind of person who expects progress, learns from resistance, and stays steady when things wobble. And over time, life has a strange way of aligning with those expectations. Not because the world is fair, but because you show up prepared to meet it head-on. Most people believe confidence is something you earn. They think it shows up after success, after approval, after everything goes according to plan. Until then, they wait, they stay quiet, they play small. And in that waiting, they confuse caution with wisdom. But confidence doesn't come from the outcome. It comes from the choice you make before the outcome is known. Confidence is not the absence of fear, it's the decision to move despite it. Every meaningful step forward happens without guarantees. If confidence required certainty, nothing bold would ever be attempted. The people who appear confident are not those who know it will work. They are the ones who decide they will act as if they can handle whatever happens next. When confidence is treated as a result, it becomes fragile. One failure can erase it. One rejection can silence it. But when confidence is a decision, it becomes durable. It doesn't rise and fall with applause or criticism. It stays steady because it's rooted in self-trust rather than external validation. This decision shows up in small moments long before big wins. It shows up when you speak up even though your voice shakes. When you take responsibility instead of waiting for instructions. When you say yes to an opportunity you don't feel fully ready for. Confidence grows through action, not contemplation. People often ask how to feel more confident. The answer is uncomfortable but simple. Act first. The feeling follows the behavior. The brain looks for evidence to justify what you do. When you act confidently, your mind starts to align with that action. Over time, what began as a decision becomes a habit, and the habit becomes identity. This is why acting as if everything works out is so powerful. It removes the dependency on results. You stop saying, "I'll believe in myself when it works," and start saying, "I'll believe in myself while I work." That shift changes how long you persist, how quickly you recover, and how boldly you try again. Confidence as a decision also changes how you interpret failure. Failure no longer becomes a verdict on who you are. It becomes feedback, information. A step in the process rather than the end of the road. When you decide to be confident, you decide that setbacks are temporary and growth is ongoing. This decision must be made repeatedly. Confidence is not a one-time choice. It's a daily practice. Some days it feels natural. Other days it feels forced. But each time you choose it, you reinforce the belief that you are capable of navigating uncertainty. The world does not reward hesitation. It rewards clarity. And clarity doesn't require knowing the outcome. It requires committing to the process. When you decide to be confident before the evidence appears, you stop outsourcing your worth to circumstances. You become grounded, adaptable, and resilient in a way that outcomes alone could never provide. Everything you do flows from how you see yourself. Not from your goals, not from your intentions, but from your identity. Long before you take action, you silently answer one question: what kind of person am I? And whatever answer you believe, your behavior works hard to stay consistent with it. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, you will hesitate. If you see yourself as someone who gets lucky sometimes, you will act inconsistently. But if you see yourself as someone things work out for, your actions change under pressure. You don't freeze. You don't retreat. You look for the next move instead of the exit. Identity is powerful because it operates automatically. You don't wake up each day debating every decision. You follow patterns, and those patterns are shaped by who you believe you are. When you act as if everything works out for you, you're not pretending. You're rehearsing a new identity until it becomes familiar. Most people try to change their lives by changing their outcomes. They chase results, hoping those results will finally give them permission to feel confident, capable, or worthy. But lasting change happens the other way around. When identity shifts, behavior follows. And when behavior follows consistently, outcomes have no choice but to change over time. This is why two people with the same skills can have completely different trajectories. One hesitates because they don't believe they belong. The other moves forward because they assume they'll figure it out. The difference is not talent. It's identity. One asks, "What if I fail?" The other asks, "What's the next step?" When your identity is rooted in resilience, setbacks don't break you. They refine you. You don't interpret difficulty as a sign to stop. You see it as part of the process. Acting as if things work out trains you to respond instead of react. You stay curious instead of defensive. You stay engaged instead of discouraged. This identity also affects how you communicate. You speak with clarity rather than apology. You listen without insecurity. You don't need to dominate conversations to feel important, and you don't disappear to feel safe. You show up grounded because your sense of self isn't being negotiated in every interaction. Over time, this way of being compounds, and small decisions made from a strong identity stack up. You take more shots, you recover faster, you learn quicker. And eventually, people label you as a confident or a lucky without seeing the internal work that made it inevitable. Acting as if everything works out is not about denial. It's about alignment. You align your actions with the person you want to become, not the fears you're trying to escape. Identity is the engine behind consistency, and consistency is what turns belief into lived experience. When you change who you believe you are, you change what you repeatedly do. And what you repeatedly do becomes the life you recognize as your own fears, not the enemy. It's a signal. It shows up whenever something matters. But the problem begins when fear is allowed to lead. When fear takes the front seat, decisions become smaller, safer, and slower. It doesn't stop moving, but progress does. Most people wait for fear to disappear before they act. They tell themselves they'll start when they feel ready, confident, or certain. But fear doesn't work that way. It doesn't fade with time. It fades with movement. And movement only happens when something stronger than fear takes the lead. That something is faith, not blind optimism. Not wishful thinking. Faith in this sense is the belief that you will figure things out, even if you don't have the full plan. It's trust in your ability to respond, adapt, and recover. When faith leads, fear becomes information, not instruction. Acting as if everything works out is an act of faith. It doesn't deny the possibility of failure. It denies failure the authority to stop you. You still feel uncertainty, but uncertainty no longer controls your choices. You move forward with intention instead of retreating into comfort. When fear leads, people over-prepare and underact. They wait for perfect timing. They rehearse conversations that never happen. They collect knowledge without applying it. Faith shifts the focus from protection to progress. It asks not, well, what if this goes wrong? But what will I do if it does? This shift changes your relationship with risk. Risk stops being something to avoid and becomes something to manage. You stop chasing guarantees and start building capacity. Every time you act despite fear, you prove to yourself that fear is survivable. And with each proof, fear loses a little more power. Faith-led action also builds momentum. Small wins create confidence. Confidence fuels courage. Courage invites bigger opportunities. None of this happens if you wait for fear to disappear. It happens when you decide that fear doesn't get the final say. This is how people grow into leadership, creativity, and influence. Not because they are fearless, but because they are faithful to the process. They show up when it's uncomfortable. They speak when it's risky. They continue when quitting would be easier. Faith keeps them moving long enough for results to catch up. When faith leads, setbacks are not stop signs. They are signals to adjust, not abandon. You don't take failure personally. You take it serious. You learn, recalibrate, and move again. Fear may still whisper, but it no longer dictates direction. Over time, this changes how you see yourself. You stop identifying as someone who avoids risk and start identifying as someone who acts with courage. Not loud courage. Quiet, steady courage. The kind that doesn't need recognition to continue. When faith consistently leads, fear slowly falls into its proper place. Present but powerless. Observed but not obeyed, most people believe their circumstances define their future. They wait for better timing, better conditions, or better luck before they commit fully. But circumstances are unstable by nature. They shift without warning. If your effort depends on them being perfect, progress will always be postponed. Consistency is different. Consistency is a choice you make regardless of how things feel or look. It's the decision to show up even when motivation is low, clarity is missing, or results are invisible. Acting as if everything works out doesn't mean every day feels good. It means you stay steady even when days feel heavy. When circumstances are good, anyone can perform. When circumstances are bad, consistency reveals character. The people who grow are not those with uninterrupted momentum, but those who keep moving during disruption. They don't let external chaos dictate internal discipline. Consistency compounds quietly. Small actions repeated daily seem insignificant in the moment, but over time they create momentum that circumstances can't easily break. You don't need massive effort. You need reliable effort. Again and again. This is how trust is built, with yourself first and then with others. Most people quit not because they failed, but because they didn't see immediate progress. They mistake slow growth for no growth. Consistency teaches patience. It trains you to respect the process rather than rush the outcome. Acting as if things will work out gives you the emotional stamina to stay in the game long enough for progress to appear. This mindset also protects you from emotional extremes. When things go well, you don't become reckless. When things go poorly, you don't collapse. You stay grounded because your identity is not tied to today's results. You focus on what you can control, your effort, your attitude, your response. Consistency turns discipline into freedom. The more predictable your habits become, the less energy you waste deciding what to do. You remove friction from action. You don't argue with yourself every day. You simply do what needs to be done, trusting that the accumulation will matter. Over time, circumstances begin to bend. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, opportunities start to appear. Skills sharpen. Confidence deepens. People notice. What once felt like effort begins to feel like momentum. And from the outside, it looks like everything worked out effortlessly. But it wasn't luck. It was alignment. Alignment between belief and behavior. Acting as if everything works out keeps you consistent when excuses are tempting. It keeps you committed when distractions multiply. It reminds you that progress is not built in bursts of intensity, but in stretches of persistence. When circumstances fluctuate, consistency becomes your anchor. It keeps you moving forward when motivation fades and certainty disappears. And over time, the very conditions you once waited for are created by the steady actions you refuse to abandon.